Hi everyone, my name is Stan. Welcome to my channel. Today we have Eva Karene Bartlett. She is a Canadian who is currently living in Russia. Eva, welcome. Welcome to the channel.
Thank you very much.
My first question for you is, tell us something a little bit about yourself.
Sure, I was actually born in America. My family moved to Canada when I was about 3 years old. So I grew up in Canada and was never terribly political. I was from an arts family. My family were musicians. I studied music at university, French as a minor. Was never political until my late 20s. And then I discovered the issue of Palestine, which I knew nothing about. And I started researching and decided to go there and witness for myself what life was like under occupation, and fell into activism and eventually started writing as a journalist. I lived in Palestine for 4 years, 8 months in the West Bank, 3 years in Gaza. And then I started going to Syria to write about the West war on Syria and what was really happening there. And since then I've gotten involved in different issues like going to the Donbass, going to Crimea, seeing what people in Crimea had to say about what the West was saying versus the reality in Crimea.
Was it your childhood dream to become a journalist, or?
Not at all. I wanted to be a marine biologist, but it turned out I wasn't very good at science. So that's why I ended up studying music at university, because I already played piano. And journalism was just something I fell into. You're probably very aware that when you travel, it's one of the best forms of education. And I'd done quite a bit of independent traveling during and after university. And it was after that I started really starting to want to know more about the world and want to know news. And in listening to certain news, then I found out about the issues like Palestine, and then going to a place like Palestine and seeing how people are really living and how the media is portraying what's happening made me want to start writing and telling what I viewed as the truth.
Which countries have you been to after university before going to Palestine and living there?
Oh, it's a hard one. It's a long list. So I've done quite a bit of traveling for the pleasure of traveling, which included, I lived in South Korea for 2 years teaching English. And during that time, I traveled extensively in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, and then in China. And otherwise, I've traveled after Palestine. I've been to Venezuela, Tunisia, of course, much of Europe. And we'll get into Russia later, I suppose. But yeah, many other countries I'm probably forgetting.
Regarding Palestine, is there anything that you can tell about how people actually live there compared to what is portrayed in Western media?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest thing I could say is Palestinians are either deliberately omitted from Western media, or if they're mentioned, they're all collectively portrayed as terrorists. But these are people that were living in their land, and then people from outside of Palestine came in and occupied their land, much like happened in Canada. And since then, there's been a slow genocide of Palestinians, but the way the media reports it is simply Israel's defending itself. And having lived in Gaza and worked with farmers who come under live Israeli fire, and I myself came under live Israeli fire, I can say without a doubt, this is not a case of Israel defending itself. This is a case of a continued colonization of the land, and the media is simply covering up the brutal reality that Palestinians are enduring every day. Even just going to the West Bank, it's not as, people might not think it's as dramatic as Gaza, because Gaza is a place that Israel drops bombs on whenever it feels like, and wages an all-out war every so many years. But in the West Bank, there's daily violence from the Israeli soldiers, from the Israeli illegal colonists. And I think one of the things that really struck me about Palestinians was, in spite of all the aggression, the violence they face on a daily basis, they're still so welcoming and hospitable and loving. And that is in contrast to how they're depicted in the media. So it was hard to wrap my head around, these are people, they should be very angry and they should be hateful, but they're not. And it just makes you all the more want to do what you can to tell their story, because they've literally welcomed me into their home. They've given me food or tea or whatever. They've welcomed me as a daughter or a sister. And then I know that they're going to be misrepresented in the media. So it became personal for me after a certain point. And eventually I learned to speak colloquial Arabic so that I could communicate with people and understand even more, the things they were going through that we would never learn about in the media.
Regarding Russia, I mean, have you been here before you chose to move here, or?
Yes, I came here 2 years ago. I thought it was high time that I come to Russia, given that I've been called a Kremlin stooge and a Russian propagandist for years because of my reporting on Syria. But also because I knew from other friends that Russia is a beautiful country, so I thought, well, I love traveling, I'd love to see Russia. So in August 2019, I came here and I spent 2 months in Russia, and I had very good encounters and experiences. And so that was one of the reasons that I decided this year to move here.
Okay, and at the time, where were you living when you visited Russia?
I was living in Kitchener, Ontario, which you might be familiar with. It's not the most beautiful of cities, but I was living there and I was going back and forth from Syria and Canada and some other places. But I was all the while thinking I want to live somewhere in the east. I was not sure where yet, but so Russia became a contender at that point.
Did you have any problems with the Canadian authorities, considering you were living in Syria and then you were living in Palestine? Or was it smooth sailing and no questions asked when you were coming back?
Surprisingly, no questions asked. My theory is that obviously they know my name and my position, but perhaps they feel like it's not worth stirring up a hornet's nest. And because they know, if they follow my social media, they know if they come at me with accusations, I'm just going to put it on social media, as I've done with BBC and other journalists that come at me with accusatory questions. So I feel like maybe I haven't been bothered because they feel it's not worth their effort, I think.
What was the worst thing you've ever been accused of? I'm curious.
Oh, there's so many accusations.
You can pinpoint maybe one or two. I don't know. If you're comfortable with it.
It's not that I'm not comfortable. I'm just trying to think what the worst is, because look, I don't mind being called a conspiracy theorist. I get that all the time, and it's a meaningless accusation. It's a CIA-derived term, right, or at least a CIA-enhanced term meant to quash dissent. And I don't mind being called a liar or a propagandist for Russia, a propagandist for Assad, because in my heart I know I'm telling the truth. So there's no one worse. I've been called so many things. They all kind of merge together. But the bottom line is I know that I'm always telling the truth as much as I can.
And before moving to Russia, I mean, what did you think about this place? What did you think about the people? What kind of misconceptions did you have? If you had any at all?
Okay, it's not that I had some misconceptions, but I didn't realize, I knew Russia was a vast country, but I didn't realize how many languages and ethnicities and cultures there are in Russia. I have to admit great naivety on my part there. It wasn't until I went to Crimea and met with Yuri Gempel, he's in Simferopol, and I'm forgetting his position, so I'm sorry for that. But anyway, he was talking about the diversity of Russia, and I was flabbergasted. I just had no idea it was so diverse. So I guess that would be my only surprise. But I didn't believe the common stereotypes about Russia because I had read enough to know that probably wasn't true. I think one thing that did surprise me, in talking with friends that live in St. Petersburg, they're Americans, but they've been living there for 10, 15 years, is the diversity of Russian education. I mean, I knew Russian education was good, but they were saying, for example, if you study one craft or one trade, you still learn poetry and about ballet and the arts and everything, even if you're studying to be a mechanic or something like that. So I thought that was very interesting because in Canada, of course, you don't get that diversity.
Okay, so here you are, you're in Kitchener, Ontario. You're thinking, all right, I kind of want to see Russia, I kind of want to move. Was there anything in particular that really forced you to make that decision, or did you just say, you know what, why not? Let's just go and see how it is?
I've been nomadic most of my adult life, living around the world, sometimes for a year or two. In the past 7, 8 years, I've been going back and forth from Canada to Syria and other countries. So it's been a very unstable life, and I started really longing for stability. But the other thing is, I started to grow, and I love Canada for certain reasons, but I started to realize I don't really identify with Canadian culture anymore. The things that I prioritize, the issues that I'm very concerned about, when I would return home, I found that most people I talked to were apathetic about it. And I started to not really identify with Canadian values, and I found here in Russia, I'm still learning, of course, but there's more a priority on family values, and that it's less so in Canada, not gone completely, but I think there's so much propaganda in the West that many of us who are living there aren't aware of because it's just insidious and it's all the time in our faces. But I became aware of it because I was living outside of Canada, and I would return and think, this is what we're talking about now? So it was building up. It wasn't a snap moment. It was building up over the years. But then last year, I left Canada to go to the UK to participate in a panel and then go on to Syria. And then all this COVID happened, and since then I haven't been back. So I saw what was happening in Canada. It's particularly in Ontario, it's been very draconian, the response to COVID, and unnecessarily so, I have to say. And I started just thinking, thank goodness I'm in Syria. And then I spent time in Serbia and thinking, thank goodness I'm in Serbia. And then I just decided, you know what, I'm going to try to move to Russia because I have friends there, and I know that life there is continuing fairly normally. And it's a beautiful country. It has vast resources. It has beautiful nature. I just thought that's where I want to be right now. And I'm glad I went with my instincts because I'm very happy here.
Okay, so where in Russia have you been so far?
Not very many places. When I was here in 2019, I was in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Crimea. I did go to the Donbass, to Donetsk, so I went via Rostov-on-Don. But yeah, I've just seen those areas, and this time, just Moscow so far.
Could you touch upon Crimea a little bit? When you went there, were you immediately arrested and shot on sight, and then arrested again and shot on sight every moment?
They fed me borscht every day in the jail. It was unbelievable. I was like, can I have some salt, please? I went with a friend, so he's Russian-American, he speaks the language, so we rented a car and drove around for a few days. So he was great because he was acting as an interpreter, and we were able to interact with people and talk about the infamous moment of Russia's invasion of, obviously joking, talk about why, what were they feeling at the time of the referendum? Did they want to join Russia? And the interesting thing I kept hearing was we wanted to return to Russia, which is obviously a stark contrast to how the West frames the referendum. So my travels in Crimea were wonderful. After my friend left and went back to Moscow, I then just traveled using my phone and in Yandex Translate and just taking local transportation. And I met wonderful people everywhere I went. And I can't wait to go back to Crimea. It's a beautiful peninsula, and yeah, people are very nice. And the Western misconception about Crimea, they have no idea that it's just full of life and tourism and people enjoying themselves in parks or on the beach or in the beautiful mountains. It's just an amazing place. But if you were to read or watch a Western media report, you'd probably just think it was gray and people were dying in the streets and I don't know what else.
For me, when I was there, because we drove there as well last year with the family, for me, the most shocking thing was actually the climate, which was incredibly tame, if you want to call it that. It could be 30 degrees, and I don't like heat, but it could be 30 degrees and I could be sitting under the shade, normally not sweating, and then you have the sea right there. Technically it should be humid, but it's not. It's extremely, it's nice. It's just an extremely nice climate that even if you go to Sochi, from what I've heard, it's still a plan to go there, that is extremely humid there, and it's quite different. But Crimea has always been known as the climate to be in, because it's just so pleasant to be in a warm climate that, it gets a little bit cool in the evening. You can wear a jacket if you want to, but you're comfortable. You're not constantly sweating. So for me, that was a very big surprise. How about St. Petersburg? You said you were there as well.
Well, I have to admit, I was there for about 4 days, and I was working on a project at the time that required a lot of my attention. So I didn't see as much of the city as I wanted to. What I saw was beautiful, beautiful architecture. I would love to go back there. I have to say I loved the train there. I didn't take the fast train. I took the slow train from Moscow, and I had a bunk with 3 other ladies in the car. And it was just amazing. I mean, I love train travel, and I loved the little glasses that you get your tea or your coffee in. And it was just so picturesque, the landscape sliding by. But as far as St. Petersburg, as lovely as it is, I haven't seen a whole lot.
To my surprise, there are actually a lot of foreigners here. Yes. Have you noticed that?
Well, so I met foreigners when I came here in 2019, and they were foreigners that are very happy to be here. And in fact, they gave me a list of things that they thought was wonderful about Russia, everything from education to just society in general, to pregnancy leave for women. And they just said, the people that I met, I think most of them were from America. Maybe one was from the UK. And they said they didn't want to go back, not in a heartbeat, because they're so happy here.
Did they say anything in particular, exactly what made them so happy, anything concrete?
Well, again, the culture, like the deep history, the depth of the diversity of the culture, and that you could have conversations with Russians and you could disagree, but you could do so in a civil manner, whereas often in the West you get huffy and puffy and it's like, that's it, I'm done, I'm not talking to you ever again.
Yeah, and then it's a fight, a divorce, families don't talk to each other, you're fired. That's unbelievable how that changed recently. I mean, I think that's what, like in 50 or 40 years, maybe even less. It went from, I will defend your right to speak your mind to that's it, you're persona non grata, you're completely shunned, you're fired.
Nowadays, for example, on Twitter, if you want to comment anything that goes against the narrative on COVID, you'll be censored. You'll have your Twitter or your Facebook account or YouTube account deleted or blacklisted. And I recently interviewed a journalist who's been an American journalist who's been doing the profession for 2 decades, and he was talking about the difference. And I think for him, it's maybe he has a broader experience. He was saying, like, back in the day, you could go to a place, file a report, and your word would be taken because you're there and you're talking to the people. But now you have these fact checkers that are saying, I don't care that you're sitting here in Moscow. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I know what I'm talking about, and you're a liar. So it's crazy times now and people are more inclined to believe somebody who's in an office in Washington, D.C. than somebody who's actually here interacting as you're doing when you're interviewing people. Very crazy times.
What kinds of things do you find difficult to adjust to here?
Well, for me, it's mainly the language. I love being in cultures where something is new and different and where I don't speak the language. I actually really thrive on not speaking a language somewhere and then starting to understand little by little. I'm very comfortable here. I don't feel out of place. I don't feel in any sense like threatened or whatever. The only thing for me is the language. So once I really make an effort and can at least converse in the basics, then I will feel very much at home.
Well, it makes sense. It's a completely different alphabet.
Yeah, I can read it slowly.
You can, really?
Yeah. And I have some words, especially the important one, "Я не говорю по-русски," and also "У меня есть два собаки." But yeah, I mean, I need to put in more of an effort so I can actually converse.
It's quite well known, at least in the internet world, in the internet blogosphere, if you want to call it that, that in Russia everyone is angry, everyone's going to be rude to you, you're not going to get any service, these kinds of stereotypes. Did you experience something like that here, or has it been the opposite? You
might meet the odd person who's, I wouldn't say they're angry, I would just say they're very efficient with time. But I haven't met angry Russian stereotypes. And actually what I will say is when I first came here in 2019, I remember going under one of the passes under the street, and I remember walking along and there was a young man lying on the ground. And I'm from Ontario. We have, unfortunately, a terrible homelessness situation and also, unfortunately, a terrible addiction situation where you walk downtown Kitchener even and you will find people passed out on the ground. And so I walked past this young man. I didn't even look twice because it's normal. But what made me look twice was that everybody around me was doing a double take because they were not used to seeing that. And I noticed that, not the person lying down. I noticed that the locals here thought it was strange to see someone lying down. And about your question about my encounters with people, where I'm living, as you know, it's south of Moscow. I'm a good hour south of Moscow, and pretty well no one in my community speaks English. Okay. So I get by with smiles and a few Russian words that I know. But people are very friendly. I think they find it very curious that this random English-speaking person is living in their community and walking around with her 2 dogs. And everybody's been friendly to me so far. I wanted to be somewhere where I would have to challenge myself. It's very easy when you're in a city anywhere in the world just to get by speaking English. So I thought, well, if I live in the countryside, I'll see a different side of Russia. I love Moscow. I think it's a very interesting city. But I just thought it would be interesting to, at least for 1 year, to live in the countryside and see how it is.
In your opinion, how does Russia differ from how it is portrayed constantly by Western media?
So Western media constantly gives a negative image of Russia. So I was talking with you before we started, and I was mentioning, not to name drop, but she made a really good point. I interviewed Maria Zakharova, and she spent, I believe it was 3 years in the West, in New York, I think it was. And she said, this is the point, she said every day she had the television on. And in the 3 years that she was in the United States, she remembers only 2 stories about Russia that were not negative. So in the span of 3 years. And of course, there's a lot of news about Russia. So 2 stories out of who knows how many in the span of 3 years. One was about a crazy cat lady, and another was about a ballerina. So when you think about it, we're incessantly bombarded in the West with stories of Russian interference in elections, Russian hacking, Russian poisoning people. And I think, I mean, I don't speak Russian, but here you can see in the background here, people are just walking around enjoying themselves in this beautiful park. People live, from what I've seen, I don't want to romanticize it, but people live a normal life here, right? And I think that if you ask the average Russian, they would know what is the lies and propaganda of American or Western media portrayal of their country and what's the reality. You might have some that support Navalny, okay, but the vast majority probably know that he's a puppet of the West. And, when the West puts out this information about Russia poisoning Navalny or something like that, I would assume the average Russian here knows that that's not the truth, right?
There are people that find that to be not the case. They find out, okay, so he was poisoned and everything being done against him is done in particular by only one person, the president of Russia, Putin. Right. But in this case, when you logically think about the situation, when you have other governments actively saying he must be released, or 17 diplomats going to his trial, you're kind of thinking, well, if my child falls on the playground, I'm the first one to go and make sure he's okay, not somebody else down the street. So if Navalny is in trouble and you see 17 diplomats in the US banging their drums about releasing him, then you gotta think, whose child is he? Who does he belong to?
Yeah.
I'm using that particular logic.
No, that's a great analogy. And you wouldn't see those 17 diplomats raising a whisper for Julian Assange, for example.
Or Maria Butina when she was actually in jail as well. What are your future plans here while you are in Russia?
Well, eventually I want to get a piece of land and either build or has a house on it. And I want to live very simply, have my own garden, still have my dogs. I want to explore Russia more, and once I know more of the language and more of the country, I'd like to try to do what you're doing and educate people outside, people who follow me, let them know a little bit about life in Russia. But basically, I want to settle down here. I'm very comfortable here, and again, I have to stress, I feel more free here than I would in Ontario, and I don't even know at this point if I can even go back to Canada.
Well, elaborate on that, please.
So right now, if I were to go back to Canada, I would have to have a vaccine passport. They've made it clear that they will not accept people if they don't have vaccine passports. If I were even to get the Sputnik vaccine, for example, Canada won't accept that. They would only accept one of these experimental, very dangerous vaccines like Pfizer or AstraZeneca, which I have no intention of getting whatsoever. So Canada is effectively denying me return to my own country because I won't put something in my body that I have every right to fear is going to negatively impact on my body.
But what about freedom? You said you feel more free here.
Well, back in Canada, Ontario is one of the has suffered one of the worst lockdowns throughout COVID. So I'm not sure the current state right now, but I'm pretty sure that you and I could not be sitting on a bench like this in Ontario without masks, this close. We're within 2 meters. And a lot of the parks are closed in Ontario. Small businesses have been eradicated because the closures have been so long. So I think what I mean by freedom is that Russia has taken precautions, and I know there was a lockdown last year, but now there are still precautions. But look around us. People are walking and enjoying the park. And when I check with my friends and family in Canada, in Ontario especially, it's not possible. That's what I mean by freedom. Or some people have police coming and knocking on their doors and barging into their homes because they dared to attend a protest or attend a gathering with more than X number of people. And it's becoming very much ironically a police state in Canada. Let me flip the question to you.
Sure.
In the West, they often say that there's no freedom of speech in Russia. My understanding is there are a number of opposition media that operate freely here, Moscow Times being one of them, I believe, and that they are very critical of the president and the government. So is that true?
There's a lot of opposition media here. In fact, you can criticize politicians, you can criticize the president. People do it all the time. On forums, on TV, on national government TV, they do it openly. They're not censored. So the idea that there's no freedom of speech here is absolutely bogus. there have only been 2 cases, right? When people always look at those 2 cases and they say there's no freedom of speech here. And those have to do with blasphemy laws. Because in many countries of this world, there are blasphemy laws. In fact, Canada had one recently until 2016, I believe. Although I'm not sure how much it was enforced. But there are 2 cases here in Russia where people posted something against the church, and then they got punished for it, and one of the cases was even dropped. So technically, there's only been 1 case. And it's not been against the government. It's been against the church, because there are anti-blasphemy laws. There we go.
Okay.
Sometimes it's hard to say that for some reason.
Yeah.
But as far as freedom, you can come up to a Russian, and if you ask them what their opinion is on this politician, that politician, they'll give you their answer. You're completely free to say exactly what you want here.
Meanwhile, Canada, it didn't succeed, but they're trying to pass Bill C-10. And it was being kind of sugar-coated as a bill about like internet equality and like making YouTube and TikTok and all these big companies accountable. But I spoke with a Canadian journalist. He was saying, well, actually, you know, what this is really going to do is punish Canadian content creators like him, like myself, like yourself, people that maybe if they have dissenting voices, not maybe, especially if they have dissenting voices, would be, I'm not sure how it would have worked, but they would have been able to silence us. So that's another, you know, aspect of this. Like, we think we have so much freedom in Canada because we can talk about gender pronouns or whatever, but if you're a dissenting voice, you will be targeted. C-10 didn't pass this time, but the same journalist I was speaking to said this is not the first time they've pitched it, and they will pitch it again with a different name or with slightly different take, but it's the same essential content that is meant to censor voices.
The one difference that I've noticed actually is that, at least in Russia, at least for now, and I hope it remains this way, it's the rule of the majority. In Canada and in the US, it's now the rule of the minority, where, again, the whole gender pronouns aspect of things. If you're against that, you can be targeted, you can be removed from your position, you can be shunned. Yet it's the absolute minority who is forcing that kind of thought onto regular, normal people who just want to raise their kids in a safe environment. And that is quite dangerous, and I see that as a danger to Canadian and American society. Something that we don't have here. In fact, we had this one case just recently with a chain that tried to come out with an LGBT marketing poster, and the culture here, regular people said, I want to buy tomatoes and cucumbers and food from your store, not to be educated about something that is not in our culture. Okay, these people, yeah, they exist, they're here, they can do what they want behind closed doors, provided that it's not to little kids, obviously. But otherwise, no marketing, please. Don't market your lifestyle. Keep it to yourself. In fact, Russia is actually still very conservative and anti-public display of affection. For example, if you see 2 people, kissing on a bench somewhere, really going at it, people are going to look at them like, listen, be decent in public. We are a conservative culture. Yeah. But then, if you want to force upon us an idea that it could be 2 people of the same sex and it should be, we say no. Because we have kids walking around here, and we truly believe in our hearts that kids should have a normal childhood. Then they can decide whatever happens in the future. But when they're kids, when they haven't formed yet as human beings, grown up, they should be left alone to do what kids do, and not to be shown adult content that doesn't need to be shown in a public space.
Well, and when you asked me earlier about like some of the decisions or some of the factors that impacted my choice to move here or elsewhere, that is exactly one of them. I don't have kids, but still the thought that kids maybe age 5 are being indoctrinated, frankly, with ideas that they shouldn't even be exposed to until much, much older, if at all, whatever, but not when they're children. And so coming from a country like Syria that has been warred upon for the last 10 years and is living under sanctions, and other countries where I've lived, and then coming back to my culture, which I don't recognize, where their importance is not on whether people are living or dying or starving to death under these sanctions. Their importance is on forcing people, mandating people to use a language just to fit, as you said, this minority of people.
Speaking of sanctions, Obama, I think, once said that the economy of Russia is destroyed. Not in those words, but something like that. In your relatively short experience here, do you find that the economy, even post-COVID or during COVID, do you find that the economy has been destroyed, or?
I came from Syria last year, and their economy is destroyed. Here, I'm not an economist, so I can't speak in detail, but I don't see that at all. And I think President Putin, I don't know when the interview was, it's fairly recent, he made some comment like, well, thanks to sanctions, we've diversified our economy. We've learned to do things that perhaps before, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially he was saying, we do things now that we used to import, we rely on outside from. So that was a very interesting comment. But no, I mean, I don't see, even where I'm living in the countryside of Moscow, not in the heart of Moscow, I just see like normal people at the store, and I don't see what I've seen in Syria, where people are scrambling to get by.
What would you say to those who are looking to visit Russia?
Prepare for your visa well in advance. It is a bureaucratic process, but it's well worth it. I think, especially if people are, inhibited by perhaps worries of Russia being cold or Russia being scary, it's really worth taking the risk and coming here, because you'll most likely, almost certainly find that if you have these preconceptions about Russia that made you afraid, you'll find that they aren't true. And it's a beautiful country, it's a vast country. I've only seen a fraction of it, and I have so much more traveling to do. And I was thinking, I've traveled the world. And maybe due to COVID, it's going to be difficult to travel a lot in the world. But living in Russia, I can still feel like I'm traveling the world, because it's just so vast and diverse. So I would just encourage people, take a risk. Come here, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. We've spoken about Russia. My heart lies in Syria, and the people, as I said, are suffering immensely, and in Gaza as well, in very similar situations, sanctions. But in the case of Gaza, for example, they can't overcome the sanctions because they're surrounded and they're fully besieged, and there's no way of producing like Russia can produce. They don't have the resources, and on top of that, they're being bombed by Israeli warplanes every so often. And it's a truly dire situation, but it doesn't have to be that way. So I guess in terms of Gaza, I would just encourage people to look past the Zionist media, look past the Western media that portrays it as a conflict, or that Israel is just responding to terrorism in Gaza. Remember that there's 2 million people there that don't want to live on food aid, but they have been forced to do so because Israel's taken away every avenue of their means of existence. And as for Syria, well, just for some context, the Syrian pound before the war, so a decade ago, the Syrian pound used to be for $1, it was around 50 pounds. Now it's over 3,000 pounds. The average Syrian earns between 50 and 60,000 pounds, with one job. So they can't afford to live. Recently I learned that a jar of cooking gas costs now 70,000 pounds. That's their entire month's salary gone. And it doesn't need to be this way, that's my point. The reason it's this way is not because of Bashar al-Assad, it's because the Syrian people refused the West project, which was to depose of their government and install a puppet government that would be favorable to America's and Israel's interests. So the people there are suffering again immensely, simply because they refuse to be owned by the West. So again, my message would be, I would really encourage people to look beyond Western reporting, particularly reports that are putting all the blame on the president, and consider that these people are very dignified and very strong people. And actually, it's quite amazing that they've not been defeated. 10 years of war, the most powerful forces waging war against them and arming terrorists to infiltrate Syria and destroy the country, and they still haven't been defeated. So I would ask people to really consider what they know about Syria and look to different sources. And if you're living in the West, to really put pressure on your governments to open the Syrian embassies, to lift the sanctions on Syria, and enable people to live like this. Everybody should be able to live with dignity. How would people in Canada feel if our country, or if your city had been invaded by terrorists, and all you were trying to do is defend your family from these terrorists killing them? And because you're defending your family, you then are called a terrorist. I mean, it's a completely upside down narrative. And I know we're here in Russia and we're talking about Russia, but I think it's really important that people empathize with what those in Syria and in Gaza and Yemen, for example, elsewhere, are enduring. And these are directly products of Western policies.
Thank you very much for this wonderful interview and this wonderful opportunity. Honestly, didn't expect it. When you first messaged me, as you know, I didn't believe that it was you.
I will tell your viewers, it was funny. I messaged you because you had in Moscow expats, you made a funny comment. I think it was like a retort to somebody who was putting some kind of anti-Russian content or something. It was funny. So I was like, oh, that's funny. I'm going to add this guy as a friend. And then you said, how do I know it's Eva Bartlett? And I said, well, look at my Facebook profile. Well, how do I know it's not a fake? So then I sent you a voice message saying, hi, I'm walking with my dog, so you don't have to add me, but it's okay. I just thought your comment was funny. You know, the thing is, I'm just me. Like, when you said, but how do I know it's Eva Bartlett? I thought, what a silly question. Like, I'm just Eva Bartlett. I didn't think of it like how people view me.
When you have somebody who's actually well known, then they add you and you're nobody, and you're thinking,
I don't think of myself as well known, but I get your point.
Thank you very much again. Anyone who liked this video, please put a thumbs up, write a comment. We would really like to know exactly what you're thinking about this interview here. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. And my name is Stan. Together we've had a very nice conversation with Eva, and we're in Park Gorkova, or Gorky Park, in Moscow, Russia. Thank you again.